Hi, I don't have a catchphrase, so Sonic the Hedgehog is a lot like the federal government. I was gonna say a joke, but come to think of it, there's so many places I could go with that, I don't know where to go.
Actually, a lot more like the government than I thought.
Hey, wow, fun fact. Did you know that Sonic the Hedgehog, get this, had a rough transition into 3D? Did you know that Sonic has never had anything but bad games and was never that good to begin with, was always terrible and sucked and is just a huge comedic laughingstock? Did you know that Mario 2 was a different game in Japan? Did you know that I have no personality or charm and I can't come up with an original thought whatsoever to save my life? Did you know my mom doesn't love me?
No, but in all seriousness, I really feel bad for Sonic the Hedgehog, and not just that original game or even the franchise as a whole, but just the concept of Sonic itself. I feel like ever since the dawn of internet criticism, Sonic's always been this huge punching bag, this collective joke everyone likes to insult, which, hey, I'm not saying Sonic's never had any bad or mediocre games. I'm not saying there's nothing to find fault with here. I'm not saying that no one should ever criticize Sonic, not at all. But at this point, it seems to me that most Sonic criticisms are just recycled tribalist gaming takes people have had bludgeoned into their heads for 20 years, which I've honestly never understood. But I want to look at all of these games in order so I can finally understand why. Why Sonic in particular? What is it about Sonic that invokes all these different varying emotions in people? What is it about Sonic that makes him so inseparable from his parent company? That makes him such a contentious figure even to this day? It all starting with that first game from 1991.
To get to the very roots of Sonic the Hedgehog, you've got to get to the very roots of Sega itself, and to get to the very roots of Sega itself, you've got to get to the very roots of video games. I'm already annoying myself so much with this pattern. This is going to be so obnoxious.
So, what exactly is a video game? I sort of think this idea of interactive entertainment has always been around to some extent. I mean, you can find ancient children's toys from thousands of years ago, back when it was impressive for 3 of your 22 kids to not die at age 5 from malaria. You can find decks of playing cards dating back to the 1400s so people wouldn't get bored during the Spanish Inquisition, and hell, the Holy Bible is still the highest selling book, ever, because people have got to find a way to stay entertained some freaking how. But all that just kept building and building up, just like every other form of human innovation, and things just kept developing and technology just kept getting better and better. We actually got to the point where if a kid wanted to hang around and have some fun, they didn't have to play with whatever the jack shit jacks were anymore. No, now they had toys that kicked legitimate ass. They had toys like marbles, they had toys like Slinkies, and hey, we weren't too far off from robots or Legos either. It was, finally, almost fun to be alive. But interactive entertainment can be much more than just whatever goes on in your dark, lonely imagination. And people began to realize this and exploit it. Games have always been something people took part in to keep themselves entertained, whether that be as a simple bet between friends or something as intense and demanding as the Olympics. Competition's always fun, but there's an intrinsic problem with it. The problem is, if nobody likes you, you're straight up screwed. You'll always need at least one other person to play a game with. That's just obviously how that works. But you can't always depend on other people to be up for a round or two of Monopoly. So if you wanted to play a game, but you were a middle child, your ass was up a creek unless you wanted to play something totally boring and lame like Solitaire. Something had to change here, and as technology and innovation progressed, that's exactly what happened. And we started to see these tubular self-service type entertainment machines popping up all over the place. Things like pinball machines, things like pachinko machines, or even things like the one-armed bandit itself, the good old-fashioned slot machine. And these were kind of the precursors to the arcade machines we'd see later on. You know, being coin-operated electronic beast meant just for one person to go totally nuts on. And as the coin-op game business kept booming and booming, more and more companies jumped in on the trend. Chief among these new companies being, one among these new companies being none other than Standard Games. Standard Games was founded back in 1940 in Hawaii with the oh-so-noble goal of providing coin-operated fun to military bases, since there was a huge demand for them during World War II, the critically acclaimed sequel to the widely beloved cult classic World War I. This whole ordeal went pretty well for about 5-6 years until Standard Games was sold and rebranded, this time as service games, which makes sense considering the military connection. Things were going pretty smoothly for service games. Their machines were selling well, they were starting to get some sweet notoriety, the cash was rolling in, and things start getting real Jesus Christy real fast. The government did what the government does and made slot machines illegal, and that's kind of a blow to a company that makes, slot machines. And hey, to Service Games' credit, this time the flop wasn't entirely their fault. This time at least.
But of course, that could not keep the company down. No, instead, Service Games relocated to Panama where they started to sell their illicit goods to military bases in Japan. See, this just proves that in corporate America, you can outsource literally everything, even crime.
Once again, things were going well. Service Games had territories in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Vietnam, but right when everything looked fine and dandy, the company got too cocky and everything went south. We're 2 for 2 here. I hate how repetitive and obvious this pattern already is. The US government had kinda caught on to the shady dealings of the company's Japanese division, leading to Service Games of Japan dissolving into 2 separate companies, Nihon Garaku Basan and Nihon Kekai Saizo, the latter of which would go on to do business as Sega Incorporated, a sort of abbreviation of Service Games. That is, until Sega Inc. was remerged with Nihon Garaku Busan, which is now the official name of the company. NGB, however, wasn't the only company in the coin-op game, as another one, David Rosen's Rosen Enterprises, which specialized in photo booths, also started gaining some attention in Japan in 1954. After 11 years of sitting around and doing literally nothing, NGB decided to get off their collective asses and bought out Rosen Enterprises, forming definitively Sega Enterprises.
Good God, that was one wild train of a roller coaster wreck.
It's weird because although NGB technically bought Rosen Enterprises, David Rosen stayed in charge over everything, which, is a bit weird, but it did turn out to be, without question, the best decision they could have ever made. You see, under David Rosen's leadership, Sega stopped selling slot machines to the military and moved its focus to selling actually legal amusement-based coin-op games like pinball machines, jukeboxes, and light gun shooters. Guys, that is the first good business decision I've heard all day. Please, give this poor CEO a raise. In the late 60s, though, Sega finally established itself as a household name with the release of the submarine simulator game Periscope, and this game was big news. The big news, in fact. It's not as impressive as arcade games you'd see in the 70s and 80s, and you also can't truly consider it the first arcade machine either, but it certainly was a trailblazer in what interactive entertainment could do, what interactive entertainment could be. There's honestly a valid argument that we never would have gotten Pac-Man or Donkey Kong or Frogger or any of the other arcade hits without Periscope. So finally, after 20-30 years, Sega had a true breakout success to their name. They had inspired a technological arcade renaissance. They were raking in millions of dollars every quarter, and they overproduced their games, leading to widespread piracy, and Sega had to stop exporting their games. I probably should have seen that coming at this point. Sega was sold again, renamed again, but they did finally get back on track in the mid-70s with their first honest-to-goodness, dollars-to-donuts video game, Pongtron. And yeah, it was no Periscope for sure, but you know damn well that not every game can be. Where Sega was once a true leader and pioneer in the arcade industry, it was now just a follower, a mere runner-up, nothing more than just another bland face in the crowd. That is, until 1979, when they released Head On, a neat little game where the player would eat dots and traverse through a maze-like structure. Now that's revolutionary right there. As you can probably tell, this was obviously the game that inspired Pac-Man, and in turn, pretty much every other video game ever as a result, and that caused a massive boom in the arcade market, which is pretty much only due to the success of Pac-Man 2 years later, and not so much because of Head On, because clearly a yellow circle would have been far too ahead of its time for 1979. But hey, it's not like Sega was floundering or anything. Like, not only was Head On doing alright enough for itself, but Sega also published the love of my life in the form of Frogger in 1981, and humanity had the privilege and blessing to peak solely because of it. But this wasn't all. See, something else was going on in 1983. Something outside of the arcade world. Okay, that counts too, but I was talking about something way worse than that. See, the home console market plummeted in '83, obviously. I mean, you've heard it legend into your head a billion times. It's something that I think is overhyped, focus on a lot more than it deserves to be, but that's not the point. All that really matters is that the US sort of got bored of video games for a couple of years there.
Yeah, it's whatever. See, I could go into detail about how Sega's arcade business started failing, so they were sold again and renamed again, or I could relapse, and right now it's really up in the air which one I'll go with.
But yeah, of course that happened, but as we're used to by now, that wasn't the end, and Sega got right back up on its feet. Their first instinct here was to start solely developing home computers for the Japanese crowd, gifting us with the world-famous, critically acclaimed SC3000. I'm kidding, no one's ever heard of this thing. It was fine, it wasn't really a huge flop or anything, it was just sort of there until it wasn't, just like my will to live. But nothing motivates success in quite the same way that competition does, and throughout the years you can very clearly see this small, prickly little thorn begin to carve its way into Sega's side, constantly pushing the company to even greater heights out of desperation, and this certainly wasn't the first time. Pause, zoom out, rewind, look a teeny little bit into the past, and you start to notice another company, much like Sega, following in the exact same narrow path Sega did. You see a company that started out with shady roots in the gambling industry, a company that kept switching business affairs, a company that eventually landed in the arcade space, just like Sega did, and that company was launching its own Japan-exclusive video game console, but unlike Sega, that company was clearly headed straight for the stars. That was what Nintendo was, and continued to be in Sega's story here, and it was always that agitator, that thing that kept Sega on its toes as the rivalry between the two brands intensified throughout the years. It was the very thing that challenged Sega to take itself to that level it could never truly reach solely on its own. And as to be expected, Sega saw that Nintendo was working on this flashy new game system called the Famicom, so they decided, yeah, let's go do that thing. They essentially just took the SC3000 and turned it into a game console, dubbing it the SG1000, which, funnily enough, launched on the same exact day and date as the Famicom, and of course it was a total smash hit success, bringing in two iconic staples of gaming culture like Flicky and Girls Garden and Star Jacker. Yeah, so here's the thing. The SG-1000 might not have been super iconic or memorable or good, but believe it or not, I technically wasn't lying when I said it was a hit. Sega had only expected it to sell like 50,000 units in its first year, but it ended up selling 3 times as much, which really isn't anything to sneeze at. Except it was totally trounced in every conceivable way by Nintendo's Famicom, and oh gosh golly gee, I just can't imagine why. Eventually though, Sega and Nintendo both realized that their console business couldn't just stay in Japan, that there was huge, untapped market potential in North America, and now that the Atari disaster was sort of in the rear view of everyone's memory now was the perfect time to strike. The problem was, both Sega and Nintendo also knew that their consoles and their whole brand images were not gonna fly in the States. That they were way, way too tailor-made for Japan, and that was something that would have to change. For starters, Nintendo's rebrand was just the very definition of excellence. Now, I may just be saying this because I might be a little too obsessed with marketing and branding, and Nintendo is my favorite multi-billion-dollar corporation in the history of ever, but my god, did they do everything precisely on point. They did away with the video game taboo at the time by referring to this not as a game console, but as an entertainment system, as a high-tech interactive entertainment toy, and that was brilliant. Beyond that, just look at the color, look at the design, the layout. You could tell that everything about the Nintendo Entertainment System made it look retro-futuristic, yet hyper 80s modern at the same time. Simply put, it was the perfect game system for that that exact time frame, but none of this would matter if the games didn't hit, and let me tell ya, Nintendo pulled no punches here. The NES launched in North America with 17 games. So much quality and quantity was immediately brought to the table from day one. Now sure, were some of those games baseball, Clue Clue Land, and Hogan's Alley? Yeah, of course, and that's to be expected, but don't count it all out like that, because where it really mattered, Nintendo knew what really mattered. Immediately, right out of the gate, we got some of the best games ever made here. Games like Excitebike and Duck Hunt, and most importantly, Super Mario Brothers. And I don't have to tell you the impact this game had, or what made it one of the greatest and most popular video games of all time. It's Super Mario Brothers. It's in the name. Nintendo's international venture here was an all-out success across the board, and it's obvious why. And the console industry flared up like never before because of it. And then we got Sega. So, Sega also did a full rebrand. In North America, Nintendo had the NES, and Sega had the Master System. And that's cool. The only problem, though, was that the Master System was honestly sorta lame. Like, really sorta lame. They tried to brand it as the be-all, end-all game system, the system for masters, the master of all other systems, if you will. Again, it's in the name. The thing is, though, this wasn't the be-all, end-all game system. This wasn't the system for masters or the master of all other systems. No, it was garbage. It was the system for loser, idiot baby bitches whose parents were too cheap or too stupid to buy an NES. It sucked.
First things first, Nintendo didn't have to market the NES as some supreme being over all the other game consoles. It was. While Sega tried their damnedest to do that and failed because, well, this thing just didn't have anything to show for it. There was nothing that inherently proved that it was better than any other game console at the time. Except for you.
Sega's branding here didn't say anything, it didn't mean anything, it was just yet another game console. Sure, its graphics looked a bit better than the NES's did generally, but graphics don't mean a moose end if the games themselves can't cut the mustard, and the Master System's games simply couldn't. And why is that? What is it about these games that generally make them so mediocrely mid? And there's a lot to it, but the underlying truth to it all was that Sega could have saved the console's doomed library from the start. I mean, the NES was the most popular console around by a long shot, so when they got the chance to try and monopolize the game industry, well, they took it and they ran as far as they could with it. And it worked. It wasn't long before the name Nintendo became synonymous with video game console. I mean, to any out-of-touch divorced dad trying to bond with their kid, this was a Nintendo. This was a Nintendo. Hell, even this was a Nintendo, and that's just plain depressing. So it's a no-brainer that every game development company needed their games on the NES because, well, that's where all the money was to be made, and Nintendo took full advantage of that in a way that may have been a bit of an overreach. They instilled this policy that if any studio wanted their games on the NES, not only were they limited to making only 5 games per year as a form of quality control, but of course they just had to go out and claim exclusivity to say that if you want your games to be on the NES, they could only be on the NES. And I'd honestly say that, yeah, this was, to some extent, Sega's fault, because I think if they had truly actually tried to make the Master System mean something, if they tried to give it some semblance of credibility at launch, to give it games that mattered, a brand that mattered, it could have stood a chance against Nintendo, and it could have stopped Nintendo from forming a monopoly, but Sega dropped the ball when it mattered most. Overall, the NES ended up selling about 62 million units, which at the time was just unthinkable for a game console, and would still be pretty impressive now. And on the other side of the aisle, the Master System, we don't really fully know how many units it sold, but it was estimated to sell around 10 to 13 million units, which, hey, isn't too awful shabby for a game system not bearing the name Nintendo in the 1980s. It's honestly more impressive than anything else, but yeah, it wasn't even close.
But what are we doing here, man? This is Sega we're talking about, and you and I both know that when Sega gets knocked down, it pathetically flops around on the floor like an incapacitated sardine for 20 minutes. Then it picks itself right back up again, and this time it'd be no different.
So tech did what tech does and kept progressing, and the time for a technological leap was coming sooner than anyone really saw coming, with Sega releasing their new console, the Mega Drive, in Japan in late 1988. And technologically speaking, this little dude was insane, but would that huge shift be enough to make Sega a worthy rival to Nintendo? No. In its first year, the Mega Drive only sold 400,000 units, which, sounds okay. But take into consideration, this was October of 1988. This was the peak of the NES's popularity. Super Mario Bros. 3, one of the all-time greatest video games ever, was coming out that same week. The Mega Drive didn't stand a chance. And it's not like it was awful or anything. Sega certainly put more effort into its launch, its image, its games, everything. More than it had ever tried with anything else, but it was still no use. It may have had twice the power as the Famicom, but in the end, it didn't even leave half the impact. Sega of America knew the Mega Drive wasn't going to flourish in the States. They knew they needed something bold and new and compelling to stick it to the man and get the people on their side, so naturally they pulled out their trump card and hit us with the best thing they've hacked up their sleeve: a fucking foot massager. The Sega Genesis is so cool, man. It's so sleek, so futuristic, so new. It's just something completely of its own, and it deserves all the praise it gets, and much more. And do I even have to say anything about Sega's genius marketing of the thing? No, I really don't. It all speaks for itself.
It's free. What Nintendo don't.
Sega chose to market the Genesis as an inherently rebellious console, and that is pure advertising brilliance. Because you know what they say, there's nothing more rebellious than buying an expensive product from a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I jest, everything made perfect sense here. To many, Nintendo was this oppressive, monopolistic regime, so to play Genesis, this more mature, the more grounded, the less corporate-friendly console, this sleeker and edgier and cooler gadget of universal proportions, it was more than just cool as hell. It was a statement of resistance. Okay, maybe this is a little silly. I say this as someone who loves the Genesis, as someone who's obsessed with the Genesis, but honestly, come on. The whole console war thing has always been a little lame, and that's honestly what I love so dearly about it. In the modern day, console wars straight up don't exist anymore. All these companies are super friendly to each other now, and often cross over, and that's cool, that's what's best for business. But there really is something charmingly hilarious about how bloody the war between Sega and Nintendo was back in the day. And it's obvious why people cared so much. Most people were only going to end up buying one console or the other, when nowadays, it's much more feasible for someone to own 2 or even 3 modern systems. But it was more than that. It wasn't just about who had the cooler toy. It wasn't just about who supported the better mascot. No. It was about lifestyle, about tribalism.
No, I don't think the 8-year-old children on the playground arguing over which console was better could really properly articulate that back then, but to be fair, neither can the 40-year-old man-children arguing on Twitter over whether, is Nintendo washed? Does Xbox have bad exclusives? Does PlayStation have any good games? Is a 6-year-old company inherently bad and terrible because it's not as culturally well-known as a 71-year-old corporation that's held a monopoly over the entire professional wrestling industry for nearly 4 decades with inconsistent quality in and of itself? But that's what it was all about. Personal superiority. Who made the best choices, who liked the best things, who owned the best stuff.
And though things may not have been perfect yet, Sega was making really good strides here in forming its own brand and its own image. Not just in marketing, but in its games as well. Sega wanted to be more down-to-earth, more mature, more realistic than taking a childlike wonder, Disney-esque approach like Nintendo did. And it did this not just through housing quote-unquote darker games, but also by letting players step into the shoes of real-life people with games like Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and Joe Montana's Sports Talk Football, which just made all the sense if your goal is connecting these games to reality. That being said, Sega clearly didn't have everything figured out yet because it ultimately still felt directionless. There was no mascot, no exclusive flagship character to try and attract people to the brand, all while their rival Nintendo was absolutely dripping in icons. And it's not like Sega didn't try, it's not like Sega didn't have a good selection of exclusive games at this point, but let's be real. There were no icons, there were no characters or franchises that exceeded the niche of gaming and really nestled their way into the mainstream media. And Sega of America knew that that's exactly what Sega needed to succeed against their rival. So Sega held a contest to see who in the company could design the best character, the most marketable character, the most iconic character. And let me tell you, man, there were some pretty interesting designs here thrown around, like this Teddy Roosevelt looking dude who I'm sure won't be important later on, or a rabbit guy with stretchy ears that could grab things. That's just terrible, I'm sorry. Oh, and also there's this dog thing, but among all of them, there was one clear, definitive winner, a speedy teal hedgehog. And this character was interesting. He could conceptually roll into a ball to build speed, based entirely off a game mechanic concept by the legendary game designer Yuji Naka. This guy in particular is so cool. He's undoubtedly one of the greatest and most important figureheads in all of gaming history. That whole momentum-based playstyle that changed the gaming landscape, all his idea. What an outright genius. And nothing I tell you, will ever change my mind about that. Of course, this one, dubbed Mr. Hedgehog 1, I mean, just look at it, it speaks for itself. Sure, it could definitely use some work. It's not all there yet. But even in the early concept art, Mr. Hedgehog just reeked of personality and character. You can smell his snarky attitude and his itch to just get going, even from this simple little sketch. Sega knew they had a champ here, and as such, they put all their energy into fleshing him out as much as they could, which, even something as simple as that was a bit rocky. And I get it, you want him to be as good as possible, but Sega of Japan, did we really need an angle with Mr. Needle Mouse and a rock band with a human girlfriend? A good thing they totally got rid of that idea and never revisited it, ever. The character would evolve naturally though, like the teal color became a cobalt blue to match Sega's branding, just as Mario's red matched Nintendo's. And in addition to that, Sega added in so many little nubbins inspired from other iconic characters, like shoes from Santa Claus and Michael Jackson, like a nose and skin design taken from Mickey Mouse, or maybe most notably his whole get-it-done demeanor taken straight from Bill Clinton, my all-time favorite fictional character. And it wasn't too long before the name Sonic the Hedgehog flung and stuck to the wall, and this is just peak character design, straight up. It's really as good as it gets. I think when it comes to any art, but especially designing characters, the most important thing is cohesion, making sure everything comes together and works together to form the perfect product, and Sonic the Hedgehog is the quintessential example of that. Not only because he's a compelling character design-wise, but because he's the perfect mascot in every conceivable way. His color matches Sega's logo, his speed put a focus on Sega's totally, definitely, completely real blast processor, which was the only advantage it had over the Super Nintendo and other 16-bit consoles. It processed slightly faster. His attitude matched Sega's rebellious marketing, and beyond that, he just looks effing cool. Like, who wouldn't want a plushie of this guy? Come on, I know I do. And as Naoto Oshima himself said, it's a design that transcends race and gender and things like that. So essentially, he's instantly relatable to everyone. But as for the making of the game itself, they've decided to go with a classic platforming style game, one that makes sense to everyone, but with a brand new twist, a sheer focus on speed and speed alone. And platforming. Yeah, it's no hush that Sega played things a little close to the hip with Sonic 1 when it comes to its playstyle. Like, it emphasized Sonic's speed at times, but it was far more focused on platforming than its speed, which I think is fine for a first go-around. Like, you kinda have to keep things simple when you're doing it for the first time. Sonic 1 kept a lot of basic platforming tropes intact, but twisted them just enough to make them their own things, and I love when games do that. Like, shiny golden collectibles. Yeah, this game has rings, but instead of them only adding to a pointless score count, they're now essential parts of the game. Without rings, you lose a life if you take damage, while having rings gives you an additional hit point, and having enough rings can get you not only more lives, but can unlock the special stages at the end of every level. This isn't like how the coins in Mario generally didn't do anything and were just sort of there. No, these are as much a part of Sonic's identity as Sonic himself. And this is something Sonic, and specifically that original trilogy, does constantly. It uses these old concepts that have been done 1,000 times and shifts them just enough to make them into their own new thing completely, and I love that. That's what the best works of art do, taking these things, these pre-established artistic concepts, and forging them into something new. That isn't just the creativity that made Sonic in the first place, it's more than that. It means something. It's the very thing the entire Sonic fanbase has strived on since Sonic's very inception. It's the exact thing that's fueled their creativity in the decades since, and that's amazing.
Okay, but actually that might be a bad thing.
I love how this game has more down-to-earth, realistic environments compared to Nintendo's typically fantastical out-there ones. This perfectly fit the more edgy, mature tone of the Sega Genesis. I love how this game uses these loops to encourage speed. I love that little shield power-up that gives you an extra hit point. I love how fun it feels to bop an enemy because of the stellar visual and audio design, and overall, I love how this game is just drowning with character. Sonic, the character, is what really makes this game, and this game lets him be a character, and that's why it was so special. I love Mario to death, but in the Mario games of the time, Mario was just sort of a damsel in distress rescuer man. There wasn't really personality brimming off of him at all times. I love Mega Man to death, but in the Mega Man games of the time, Mega Man was just sort of a robot blow-up pew-pew man. There wasn't really personality brimming off of him at all times. I love Pac-Man to death, but he's a fucking circle.
But Sonic was allowed to be an actual character with actual personality. You can just tell that he's good-hearted and sincere, but overly cocky and impatient. And the best part of all of this is that you don't have to go to some outside material like an instruction booklet or a commercial to get any of this. No, you can get all of this from just playing the base game, just seeing his little animations and quirks. It's amazing.
The game lets him have weaknesses, like his inability to swim, which has now become a famous character trait of his. The game lets him have strengths, the game lets him have expressions, this game lets him have charm, and that's what matters most here. Please don't take that as me saying I don't like Mario or Pac-Man or Mega Man or Zelda or any other game series. I love them all. They're some of my favorite just things in general, but this, and adding charm and personality to characters in game, is a field that the Sonic series honestly just doesn't get nearly enough credit for curating in the first place. But let's be real. In a fictional setting, a hero is only as strong as his villain, and if anything's clear at this point, it's that Sonic the Hedgehog is strong as hell. Hey, remember that Teddy Roosevelt-looking guy from earlier? Well, shift him up a little bit, and voila! You have Dr. Ivo Robotnik, the mad scientist who directly opposes Sonic here. I'm so curious about Robotnik's parents, though. Like, I just think naming your kid Ivo Robotnik is like naming your kid Johnny G. Autocrat and expecting him not to grow up to be a fascistic overlord bastard for some reason. Just like how Sonic's design was perfect, I'd argue Robotnik's was right up there as well. And a lot of that is purely just a reflection of Sonic's design. I mean, look at Sonic. He's perfect. And one of the things that make him that way is just how unique and stylized he is, and that's so great because that uniqueness, that style, in turn, can be carried over to other characters and create a full universe, and that's truly how icons are forged. That's what legends are made of. And all that being said, the total genius of Dr. Robotnik's character design can't just be narrowed down to that. No, he's an incredibly creative character just by his own merit in every single way. His color scheme combats Sonic just as the character itself does, which is exactly what you're looking for in an antagonist. He's rotund, goofy, comically evil, and all of this works to make Robotnik as memorable as humanly possible, but it doesn't end there, no. Because Robotnik's purpose, Robotnik's goals, Robotnik's very existence challenges Sonic's. The Sonic series has always had a bit of a not-so-subtle pro-environmental agenda. Essentially, flowers good, pollution bad.
The woke left is ruining our video games.
Robotnik's goal is to transform the world into an evil, mechanical empire with his cold, cruel image at the very center, with all the animals and woodland creatures of the world transformed into mindless robots, and Sonic's goal is to not let that happen. So even the basic conflict of this game, of these characters, is something much more complex than gaming had really ever seen before. This was more than just good guy hero rescues weak lame princess. This was a story that was actually, to an extent, relevant, that was important, that meant something.
What are you saying? Tech billionaires replacing us with robots and their cyber hellhole empires? What's not to love? You been on Twitter recently?
but of course leave it to Sega of Japan to screw things up. For some reason, they wanted to name Dr. Robotnik Dr. Eggman instead, because, get it? His body looks like an egg. It's hilarious. This is something we see a lot in the early days of Sonic, translation errors and disagreements between Sega of America and Japan. Sega of Japan, for some reason, really wanted things to be different and way lamer in their region, so get used to it. I don't know, I don't really care. I'm fine with either of the names. Like, I personally rationalize it that his name in all classic Sonic content, anything before Mania, is Robotnik, and anything after is his euphemism of Eggman, and that just makes the most sense all around to me, since Mania is kind of the game where Robotnik really cracks anyway. So yeah, that's the story here, but things do go a little deeper with the inclusion of the 6 Chaos Emeralds, 6 brightly colored mystical gems that exist. In later games, they're actually part of the story, but they're just kind of here in Sonic 1. If you have 50 rings at the end of each stage, you can jump into a special stage and... Yeah, so everyone likes to complain about how bad the Sonic 1 special stages are. You know, how they make no sense navigationally, how they look like something out of an acid trip of metaphorical proportions on cocaine-flavored wheels, how they don't even really feel like you're in control of Sonic, instead you're controlling the world around him. It's weird, I don't know. I don't think they're that bad, like I would make myself put up with them if there were any reason at all to. But no, all you get for nabbing the 6 Chaos Emeralds in this game is some extra flowers in the ending scene. It leaves a lot to be desired, because what the hell reason even is there to get these flowers, you know? Regardless, what really matters here is what matters in any platformer, the level design and theming, and let me tell ya, designer Hirokazu Yasuhara understood the assignment, and he understood it well. Yasuhara designed the majority of Sonic 1's levels, alongside the other games in the original Sonic trilogy, and no, they weren't always perfect, but they certainly had it where it counted. Starting off, obviously, we gotta talk about Green Hill Zone, and undeniably, it really is the perfect opening level for a game. Again, it's an incredible example of cohesion in gaming, with everything, visuals, music, layout, enemies, all coming together to form something amazing. Green Hill was something like no one had ever seen before in platformers. The color here, the detail, the lighting, the music, it was so new despite being a kinda simple grassland area. It, for the first time in a platformer like this, felt like a real place you could actually live in. And that's something this game, and this trilogy as a whole, really excels at. Plus, I think everyone pretty much agrees that Green Hill is designed the best out of all the stages in this game, and the focus on speed in tandem with the platforming really helps that. Yeah, I do agree. It's annoying that almost every Sonic game for a while there forced Green Hill into it somewhere, but there's a reason it keeps getting brought back. It really is that good. And then there's Marble Zone. Everyone hates Marble Zone, and I mean, I almost can't blame them. It's trickier than it has any right to be. And as a kid, this was always a stage that tripped me up. It's slow, it makes you wait around a lot, it's way too long, and it never really lets you go fast, which is the whole point of Sonic the Hedgehog. And from that lens, sure, I guess I can get why people don't like it, but here's the thing. In my opinion, the problem here isn't the stage itself. Marble Zone is fine, really good even. I love the aesthetic, the music, and the tricky platforming is designed very well. The problem here is its placement in the game. This feels like, more than anything, a penultimate level, a test to see how patient you can be, how patient Sonic, this impulsive, irritable character, can be when he's not zooming past the screen at all times, but it's frankly thrown at the player way too soon, when something like Spring Yard Zone would have worked way better for a second zone. And it's here where the stages really start to feel a little winded. Like, Green Hill also had 3 zones, but they were much shorter and better paced. For the rest of this game though, 3 full zones is, I'll admit, a bit overkill. Be that as it may, the Spring Yard and Starlight zones are great. They're designed well, they sound good, they look good, and they feel like actual down-to-earth locations you could spend a Friday evening in. And for Sonic, and Sega as well, what more could you really ask for? The most outright hated zone in the game is Labyrinth Zone, and I gotta agree with you there. It may be this big Sonic 1 defender, but there's no sugarcoating this. This zone is just bad. I do like that there's a water level to emphasize how much of a challenge water poses to Sonic, given it is his one main weakness, but not like this. Stages like Chemical Plants or Aquatic Ruins or Hydro City prove that you can make good Sonic levels in water, but Sonic 1 does it all wrong. The point here should be to avoid the water, to get out of it as fast as you can, but in Labyrinth Zone, you're stuck in the water nearly the whole time with random traps and enemy placements that just aren't well thought out at all. Honestly, if this zone was completely removed and Marble Zone was moved to its place right before Scrap Brain, I think this game's reputation would be a whole lot better. And sure, that would make the game a good bit shorter, but I don't think there's any reason for it to be as long as it is anyways, given the gross lack of a save feature here. But on that note, how is Scrap Brain Zone? Any good? Yeah, not really. I mean, it's an okay final level, but it has way too much trial and error gameplay, and that's no fun. That, plus the last zone here is a rehash of Labyrinth Zone. Okay, I think I get why some people hate you now. Nah, it's not too bad. I mean, there's this tubular shortcut at the beginning that lets you skip most of the level, which is definitely your best option here. And then I guess what technically is the last level of the game is the final zone. It's in the name. Yeah, whatever. I mean, I don't consider it a real zone. No, it's really just a final boss battle, and that's it. And as such, it's perfectly fine. Not the hardest boss battle out there, but without rings and with a live counter ensuring you only have a number of deaths before you have to restart the whole game, it serves its purpose well enough. And then the game ends, you save the world, you get your flowers, maybe. Roll credits.
It may be really easy to be rough on Sonic 1 now, but for the first step in a franchise, I think it truly is a good game. Again, it does have pacing problems, and maybe it focuses a little too much on standard platforming, but overall, it's still a good game. It's got mostly solid level layouts, it's got fun physics, it's got an awesome soundtrack, and it's got excellent characters and charm. And at the end of the day, it's still one of the most important platformers ever made, and that's what I mean when I say it's underrated, or almost a masterpiece, because I can't pretend it doesn't have shortcomings. I can't pretend it doesn't have flaws a million. I can totally get why people love to clown on it nowadays, but I really don't think it gets all the credit it deserves for all the things it did. It still holds up to this day, and I think a lot of its better qualities are misunderstood or overlooked.
Personally speaking, my first experience with Sonic was, it's strange. I almost don't remember it. You see, my exact memories of 2009 to 2011 are more shaky than anything else. It's weird. Mario's been present in my life ever since I was like, 2, 3 years old, and I remember a time without Mario beforehand, but oddly enough, I have no recollection of being introduced to Sonic the Hedgehog, and yet I know I didn't play any Sonic games until I received the Sonic Classic Collection on the DS when I was like, maybe 6 or 7? I don't remember getting this game. I don't remember playing it for the first time. Hell, I don't remember seeing Sonic at all for the first time. It feels to me like he's just always been there, and in the creepiest of ways. My best bet is that since character design and branding is something I've always been mildly obsessed with, I might have picked it out at a GameStop or something because I thought it looked cool, or maybe I might have gotten it as a birthday gift or something. I legitimately do not remember, and I have lost an ungodly amount of sleep over this. Whatever, the Sonic Classic Collection on DS was pretty cool. It was just a bundle of straight ports from the Sonic trilogy with some added bonuses, like a save feature for the first 2 games, and listen, sure, I was homeschooled, but no matter how dumb I was, I knew these were decades-old games. I knew they were just ports with nothing really new added. I knew there were more advanced modern games, more advanced modern Sonic games I could have spent my time on, but I spent so much of my young life here. This, alongside Mario 64 DS, was sort of my go-to game when I knew I wanted to play a DS game, but I just didn't quite know which one. And it's not hard to see why. Sure, maybe Sonic 1 wasn't the richest of the trilogy, maybe it had a few more design flaws, a few rougher edges if you will, but that didn't stop it from reaching great heights itself, with generally solid level designs, immersive level themes, fun combat, a banging soundtrack, and a sheer ton of heart and passion. For me, this title earns a 6 out of 8 nuggets. It still is a really solid game, no matter if you play it on the original Genesis cartridge, or say, a port like the Sonic Mega Collection or Classic Collection, or a remake like Nevermind, or in the superior in every way remaster in Sonic Origins. It's still, overall, a great foundation for a great series.
This was a rare example in the gaming industry of everything coming together to form a cohesively perfect product. From a character design angle, they went as hard as they could to make the most compelling and marketable character they could. From a game design perspective, they I mean, they tried. And when it comes to the advertising, what more really needs to be said? They did everything they could do the best they could do, and it paid off big time.
This is one of the few main really dumb Sega America pulled. For some reason, they were originally really hesitant about Sonic. They didn't seem to have a ton of faith that American kids would think Sonic was a cool, edgy badass, but they did eventually give in and bundled Sonic with the Genesis for a clean and simple 150 beans. In the same way Mario came packed with the NES, because, I mean, sure, Sonic might be a flop, but it's not like he could do any worse than Altered Beast, so like, at this point, why not? Ultimately, Sega knew they had an icon on their hands, and soon enough, this was proved to the world at large when Sonic made his very first ever appearance in the Rad Mobile arcade game as a rear-view mirror ornament decoration. It's a racing arcade game from 1991. Rad Mobile's okay. It was actually Sega's first ever 32-bit game, and people generally liked it, though, let's be real, nowadays people don't remember Rad Mobile for being a decent little arcade game, or even for being such a significant landmark for Sega. No, it's remembered for being Sonic's first appearance in the gaming sphere. But hey, this was a genius idea, and Sega didn't end there. They were stuffing this little dude everywhere. Like, they packed him in with the Genesis, they gave him these crazy marketing campaigns, and he even started to slowly show up in other Sega games, as any great mascot would. And this is where Sega really started to double down on their rivalry with Nintendo, because they had their mascot, they had their flagship guy, one that screamed Sega in every conceivable way, one that resembled their branding, one who possessed the rebellious spirit, one whose strengths represented those of the Sega Genesis console, one who was loud and proud above everything else and wasn't afraid to be, just like Sega itself. And they went absolutely hedgehog wild with it. Commercials? Yup, Sonic was there, showing just how advanced and spectacular both the Genesis and Sonic were over the competition. Live events? You know it, baby. Sonic was everywhere. Competitions, retailers, they'd literally go to malls and do live demonstrations comparing Sonic to Mario and ask, look at this, look at me in the eyes. Which do you really prefer? Look at these graphics. The Sega Genesis immediately became a massive cultural phenomenon when packed in with Sonic, who became an even bigger one for obvious reasons. For the first and only time, Sega was finally the top dog in the gaming industry, knocking even Nintendo off its shiny platinum throne and roping in over 65% of the gaming industry's market share. The Sega Genesis ultimately ended up selling about 30 million units, and Sonic sold 15 million, which I think says a lot.
Either way, it's still so beautiful to see a creative vision like this come together and live to the absolute fullest, despite all the little pushbacks, all the things that stood in its way, the rivalry between Sega and Nintendo, for instance, or government interventions, or really bad business ideas. No, despite all of that, Sonic walked so Sega could trip and fall over.